Okay, thank you all for being here. And Jay and Diana are on. So I'm Megan Mesher-Cox. If you all haven't met me, thank you so much for joining us for part 2 of this 2-part series of diabetes and insulin resistance. What you don't know can hurt you. So if you haven't seen the first part and you want to watch that, if you go to the website PrevDoc, as in preventative doc, PrevDoc.com. You can see the recordings of all our previous webinars, including the part 1 that we did last month. So I'm going to introduce Jay Ziebart here, and then she's going to be introducing Diana, who's our special guest for the day. So thanks again for being here, and I'll see you all at the end when we do question and answer.
Thank you, Dr. Cox. Hello, everyone. Hello, welcome, welcome. Don't forget, or if this is your first time, that if you have any questions or comments, to put them in the chat or the Q&A. And for any of the 3 of us, we're happy to address comments or questions at the end. If I see something pop up and it's relevant to what I'm talking about, I may address it, but most of the time we wait until the end. So, we like to leave a nice big chunk of time for questions and answers at the end. So feel free, if you have a question, you have a comment, or there's anything you want to share, please do, because it always leads to interesting discussions, and maybe it's something that somebody else was thinking of too. So I want to thank Dr. Cox for introducing me. If you have never met me before, my name is Jay Ziebart with Plant-Based for Life. I'm a nutritionist. Dr. Megan Mesher-Cox and I have created Disease Prevention and Reversal. That PrevDoc.com website has a ton of resources, so please do check it out. And as Dr. Cox said, the video from part 1 is on the site. I'm going to go ahead and jump in because we have a lot we want to cover today, and we are very mindful of time. So let's go ahead and get started with diabetes and insulin resistance, part 2. So as I said, I'm Jay Ziebart. I have a special guest, Diana Wyenn, that I'm going to be introducing toward the end, and she's going to come on and share a little bit about her story. She's really wonderful, and I'm really looking forward to watching it with you. All right, so what you don't know can hurt you. That's the reason why we do these things, why we spend so much of our own time doing these free webinars, is because the information is what people need. People need good information to make good decisions. And so we're going to talk about insulin resistance, and we're going to talk about maybe some things that are a little bit different, or a lot different maybe, from what you typically hear. And I will explain why that is as well. So Dr. Cox did, a nice breakdown of what insulin resistance is, and technical and medication and things like that. So definitely watch that part 1. But let me do a quick recap, just a very short analogy of insulin resistance. So what happens when we eat food? The energy that we need, our food is turned into glucose, and our cells need that glucose for energy. So glucose is our body's favorite source of energy. So we really need that glucose, but it needs to get in the cell. So people that have high blood sugar, maybe you've heard that before, people with different kinds of diabetes will sometimes have high blood sugar. And that's usually related to the fact that the blood sugar cannot get into the cell. It's just sitting in the blood. So insulin is the key. So we have these little cells, and they're kind of locked, and we have little insulin receptors on the outside of the cell. Insulin is the key. It opens up those little receptors so that the glucose can get into the cell. The cell needs that energy. It needs it in order to function. It needs it in order to thrive, in order to do the good work that it does. So it's a really important process. And if that receptor is blocked, that is really called insulin resistance. There's a lot of aspects to it. Again, watch that first video. But this little image I have here, my favorite analogy is basically, the key and lock. And insulin resistance is, things that we do, things that we eat are like sticking gum in the lock and then trying to open it. And we don't have very much success with that. So we want to improve our insulin sensitivity, and we want to stay away from sticking gum in the lock. So let me explain what I mean by that. So when we're talking about blood sugar control, there are basically 2 main paths to do this. Now, the most common one that's recommended is low carbohydrate diet, because carbohydrates turn into glucose. But remember, glucose is our body's favorite source of energy, especially our brain's favorite source of energy. We want to make sure we feed this thing really, really well, right? So we don't want to limit carbohydrates. We want to be smarter about the carbohydrates that we choose. So you can control blood sugar by reducing your carbohydrate intake, but then you're also not giving your body what it needs in order to function properly. So two paths I'm talking about here: reducing carbohydrates so you don't have as much glucose in your blood, or healing that underlying insulin resistance so that there's no gum in the lock, right? So that the insulin can transport that glucose into the cell properly. So those are the two paths. And basically, one is very, very restrictive. One leads to more and more medication typically, lots of other kinds of diagnoses typically. And the other one leads to better health, better vitality, more energy, and is expansive instead of restrictive. So why do we have conflicting recommendations? Why does one healthcare professional and another recommend two different things? So there are a lot of reasons for this. The science is really interesting on this. Actually, healthcare professionals, doesn't really matter what kind of healthcare professional it is, they tend to recommend what they are willing to do themselves in their own lives. And so that is a heavy amount of bias, right? That's really a lot of the personal opinion, the personal beliefs and feelings and likes and dislikes, all of that in a recommendation. So what we try to do on a lot of lifestyle medicine healthcare professionals, what they try to do is take themselves out of the equation and only base recommendations on the evidence, on solid scientific consensus. And the science is actually quite clear. I mean, there are always outliers, but the scientific consensus, which just means that all those really smart people agree on this, set of studies, the results of studies. The scientific consensus is really clear. Now, you can successfully, at least for a while, control your blood sugar the other way, but using the evidence-based scientific studies about how to heal insulin resistance as well as healing the rest of our body is the way that you treat the underlying issue and the way you find your way to your best version of yourself, your best version of your own health. So our healthcare system is what it is. We have one of the most advanced, technological and advanced treatment systems in the world, but we still have a lot of people that aren't doing well. And part of the problem is that we have a sick care system, not a healthcare system. What do I mean by that? We treat symptoms. And that's really the difference between the two paths I'm talking about. So we don't treat the whole person. We don't treat the underlying causes. We say the blood sugar is high, bring down the blood sugar. Okay, but what's causing that, or what's underneath that will help us to have a healthy body and to maintain better blood sugar control long term? So that's the difference between that healthcare and sick care model. We want to treat the whole person. We want to address those underlying causes and not just the symptoms. Provider bias I already talked about. There's also the SAD culture. What do I mean by SAD? The standard American diet. The standard American diet is not good, right? Think about all those fast food places, all the highly processed foods we eat. I mean, it's pretty scary out there and pretty sad. So the culture around food is very, very interesting. A lot of people tie happiness to their food. I do too, but I do it in a different way. I think about all of those beautiful things that are going into my body to make me well, which is a lot better. Well body is a lot easier to be happy in than an unwell one. And I always make sure that even though I'm eating healthy, that my food is fun, easy, and delicious. Because if it's not very sustainable. So it doesn't have to be boring. It doesn't have to be unpleasant. You just have to make smarter choices. Now, let me give you some tips on how to do that. So basically here I'm saying which one is actually the easy path, because that is part of the culture too, right? Just give me the pill, just, instant gratification, just make it easy. So a low carb, which is typically what's very often recommended, is very restrictive. It's very restrictive. And those starchy foods, those high carbohydrate foods, or those carbohydrate rich whole foods, are our comfort foods. They are the foods that make us happy. So if we are eliminating those from our diet, yes, we're a lot of times we're eating these richer foods that might give us a little bit of temporary jolt, right? A little bit of temporary dopamine response, etc. But long term, it doesn't really work that way. It's just about being in the moment. So low carb, very restrictive, extremely restrictive. There's only, a handful of animals, for example, that we can eat, or that we typically eat. So it's really actually quite restrictive. And trying to eliminate carbohydrate from your diet is really hard to do, because all plants contain carbohydrates. All of them do. So, it's really hard to take that out of your diet, or to really, really, really restrict it. Plus, you have diminishing returns. What do I mean by that? I mean that the longer you're on a low carb diet, the harder it gets to control your blood sugar. That's very typical. So you have to clamp down harder and harder and harder, and probably increase medication over time too, because our body needs that glucose for energy. And so as we're going along, we're increasing foods that increase insulin resistance. Again, remember that gum in the lock. These foods, these high fat, these high protein, especially animal protein foods, gum the lock. And so we really want to get away from that as much as possible, not to mention all the processed foods we eat. So as we're eating this low carbohydrate, high protein, maybe high fat diet, we are actually adding to the different diseases that we're likely to end up with. So diabetes and heart disease are best friends. And that's really unfortunate, but they are very, very closely tied together. And so when you have one, if you keep down that path, you're likely to have issues in the other area. I mean, blood sugar, it's in the blood, right? The cardiovascular system is about blood. So this whole thing is all connected. We separate these things into digestive system, cardiovascular system, pulmonary, all nervous system, all of those different kinds of systems, but it is one unit. You put food in, and that is what fuels everything. Now, whole food plant-based diet is expansive. What do I mean by that? Of course, we're going to want to stay away from some of these things that aren't so good for us, the animal products, the highly processed foods, the oils, all of that kind of thing. But why do I say it's expansive? Because anybody who's transitioned to a whole food plant-based diet will tell you that their menu tends to really broaden. There are anywhere between 70 and 100,000 species of plant that we can eat. So that's a lot of choices. And we just find really amazing creative ways to, combine them, and even combine them into familiar forms, like spaghetti and burgers and all those things that we love, just with upgraded ingredients. And that's really, really the path to easy transition into eating a healthier diet. Eat what you love, just upgrade those ingredients. So what else do we get with the whole food plant-based diet? Increasing vitality, increased vigor, increased energy, brighter skin, a clearer mind, all of that. It's amazing how many different things it impacts. Remember, this is all one system, and we want to fuel it in the best possible way. It also can potentially lead to reversal of disease, fewer medications, fewer complications if you can't completely reverse out of whatever it is that you have. Sometimes you can't. But even if you cannot reverse out of your disease, even if you can't go into complete remission, you can improve your overall health, which helps you to manage that, whatever that diagnosis is, even better. So which is the truly easier path? You get to decide. This is all you. This is all you. We just come here and tell you the information, because you cannot make a good decision without good information. So carbohydrate is really the sticking point. The carbohydrate is kind of that point where we talk about, where we have differences in the recommendations. But I just want to point out again that carbohydrate-rich foods are varied, very wide and varied. They're on a really, truly broad spectrum. Broccoli is a carbohydrate. So when people say carbs are bad, or carbs are unhealthy, or carbs make you fat, or whatever it is, no, They don't. It really depends on your choice of carbohydrates. So we really want to stick to those healthy carbohydrates. So the further we get to the other side, the more we see dis-ease, the more we see problems, the more we have sluggish metabolisms, the more we have foggy brain, the more we have trouble with our skin, the more problems that we have, the more we move toward that side of the spectrum. So eat those whole carbohydrate foods, which includes all of the fruits and vegetables, whole grains. Beans have carbohydrate as well, but they're predominantly protein-based foods. So they all really contain carbohydrates, but our bodies need that. They need that to really thrive. So insulin resistance. So which foods help and which foods make insulin resistance worse? So the foods that help, I'm sure you guessed it, whole plant foods. Now, what do I mean by whole? I mean as close to the way they grew as possible, as close to the way they looked while they were growing. Now, we can do a little bit of processing. That's still okay. As a matter of fact, it's actually kind of a good idea to do a mixture of raw and cooked because it creates some different kinds of absorption when we cook things. But we want to stick to these whole foods. All of the foods that we can eat that grow from the ground, those are the foods we want to have as the core of what we eat. Now, these other foods, these highly processed foods, the snack foods, the oils, the animal products, these foods are things that worsen insulin resistance. At the end, I'm also going to talk about other things that can improve and worsen insulin resistance, but mostly today we're talking about food. So stick to those healthy foods. Fruit is not unhealthy. Fruit does not cause weight gain. Fruit is not the enemy. Fruit is one of the best ways to get the micronutrients we need in order to have the energy we need, have the energy each of our cells need to function, and for all the micronutrients that are in there, the antioxidants, all of the things that are very protective for our bodies. We need to eat a variety of whole plant foods. Now, does that mean you have to be 100% plant-based? No, it doesn't. But the more you move toward whole food plant-based, the more results you'll see. So that's really, again, this is up to you. None of us are going to come to your home and tie you to a chair and force feed you kale. It's not going to happen. You've got to do this for yourself. But trust me, it is absolutely worth it. So I just want to talk a little bit about saturated fat and cholesterol. So saturated fat is one of these ones that I like to call out. Some whole plant foods actually contain a little bit of saturated fat. And those are ones if we have, really high insulin resistance, we might actually want to limit those too. But I do want to show you, foods, especially these animal foods, are really high in these things. And that is really gumming up the works. So I like to call out steak and salmon because people very often have heard that fish is good for us. Why have we heard that fish is good for us? There's really only one big thing in it that it has in quantity that is really good for us, and we can get that elsewhere. And that are those omega-3 fatty acids. Get your flax in, grind that flax and get it in every day. So have a look at these numbers here. Like the salmon actually has quite a bit more cholesterol than the steak. Also note here the cheese. So cheese, I know, but cheese is our worst saturated fat offender. Look at that steak, 5.4 grams of saturated fat per 100 grams. So that's about 3 ounces-ish. And for the same amount of cheese, 21 grams of saturated fat. Oh my goodness. Now we know saturated fat is tied to high blood pressure, high cholesterol, of course, cardiovascular disease. It's tied to all of that, but it is also linked to insulin resistance. Check out the cholesterol in the cheese. Yikes. So what I want to do is I want to briefly talk about the means in which we get our food. So whole grains are fantastic. They're not bad for you. They are very, very good for you. The only time you should be avoiding certain whole grains is if you have celiac disease or if you have allergies and things like that. This little slide is what I want to show you here. Brenda Davis is a really well-known registered dietitian that has created this hierarchy of whole grains. I'm not going to go through the whole thing. I just wanted to show you why processed food is really can actually cause harm, and why processed food is not as desirable as the whole food alternative. So when we look at the top of the list, the best ones are the intact grains, fully intact. And then in between is good. This is all a good list. But as we go down to ground and flaked and puffed, even though it's whole grain, why are those at the bottom of the list? Because they are more absorbable. So we want our body to work to break down that fiber. And the more we do the work for it, the more quickly it gets absorbed. So if you're trying to control blood sugar, you want to stay a little bit closer to the top in terms of your intact food. So those flakes and those flours and those puffed wheats and things have a lot of surface area, and they get absorbed much more quickly than the intact versions. So carb sensitivity. So I get this sometimes, especially with people that have been on a low carb diet for a while, or high fat, ketogenic, that sort of thing. They become a little bit carb sensitive. So if they eat even a beautiful whole carb like one of these here, their blood sugar will spike. So what do you do in those situations? You have to retrain your body a little bit. It's been in this sort of crisis mode. You got to retrain it with those good micronutrients. So what you do is you make sure that half of your food is non-starchy vegetables. This is Kaiser's plate. Really, really fantastic. I love it. So quarter of the plate is a predominant protein, those beans. Quarter of the plate is a whole grain, that quinoa, and half the plate is non-starchy vegetables. So anytime you're eating food, make sure that half of what you're eating is a non-starchy vegetable. The only upgrade I would put on this plate here is I would make at least a quarter of those non-starchy vegetables greens, because greens are so healing in a variety of ways. So these are foods that you want to get in on a daily basis. We don't have time to go through these today, but I'm just going to rattle them off. We go through these all the time. So if you need more info on this, just reach out to me. Greens, get in those dark leafy greens. Spices, they're amazingly powerful antioxidants. Berries are, compared to fruit, they're like 10 times the antioxidant power. So get those berries in, lots of different colors. Beans, a cup to a cup and a half a day. Aromatics, getting your onions and garlic. They not only make your food delicious, but they also do wonderful, wonderful things for our bodies. Mushrooms, fantastic, so health protective, very low calorie density, high nutrient density. They must be cooked. They have a mild toxin in them, so please don't eat them raw. Get in those flax, chia, or hemp seeds every day. Remember, flax and chia must be ground. I know I rattled through that really quickly, but I didn't want to get out of here without going through it. So final quick tips. How do we improve insulin sensitivity? As I promised, we have a few things that are non-food related, but make sure to include those whole food carbohydrates. And as you're transitioning and as you're working toward your health goals, make sure half of those are non-starchy veggies. Make sure to get in daily movement. That improves insulin sensitivity as well. Move that body, move those muscles, get that blood flowing. It makes all of the tissues more sensitive. Quality sleep. Sleep is so important, and so many people have trouble with it. But if you are not sleeping, things are not working properly, including maintaining good blood sugar control. And stress. Stress all by itself with no influx of calories can make your blood sugar go up. So this is one thing we can't get away from stress. I mean, stress is part of our lives. We need it to keep ourselves moving. But that chronic, stress that we just sit with, that stuff is not good for us. And we need to learn how to manage it, either avoid it or deal with it when it arrives. What things worsen insulin resistance? Saturated fat and cholesterol, trans fats. It's really about the harmful fats, animal products, and highly processed foods. So stick more toward those whole food carbohydrate rich foods to heal that insulin sensitivity. So now I have the pleasure of introducing our special guest for today. I just adore this woman. She is amazing. So she is a director and a creator and a performer, and she created this performance called Blood Sugar. Now, she is somebody that lives with type 1 diabetes, and so she's going to be sharing a little bit of her story. But through her experiences, she learned a lot. And then she went further and did some more research, and now she teaches this through her performances. So I'm really excited to introduce her to you. So let me go ahead. I'm going to share this little bit of information at the end. So don't worry about getting it down now. We will definitely get it to you at the end. Okay, I see somebody's having an audio issue. If you just pop back out and pop back in again, that'll probably correct it. Let me stop share. Welcome, Diana.
Hello, thank you, Jay, for that introduction, and hello to everyone out there. It's a real joy and honor to be able to share a bit of my work and also my journey with all of you. I also loved watching the last presentation and watching yours, Jay, because so much of what you share deeply resonates, as folks will find out. So yes, I am a theater director and choreographer based in Los Angeles and a type 1. And so I bet you're wondering why a theater director and choreographer is being asked to present alongside some medical professionals. But in fact, I often now share my work and ask medical professionals to come join me for a conversation with the audience after. So it's kind of fun to have the script flipped a little bit. I was diagnosed at 20. I'm one of those folks where it doesn't run in my family. It's not in my genetics. Something environmental triggered my type 1. And I got diagnosed at the same time I was studying at drama school, and I happened to be overseas in London. And if you watch the whole show, you'll find out a little bit about that and how I really do feel like access to universal health care made it so that I got treatment. So I'm definitely a big proponent for that. But once I got diagnosed, I have to share that because of the stigma and bias around diabetes, I hid it. I completely hid it for 8 years, not telling anyone that I had this disease. And finally, after that length of time, I just decided that was ridiculous. It wasn't safe, and if I felt like folks weren't going to like me or hire me, then that was on them. And so I became a lot more public about living with diabetes. I wanted to be an advocate for my community. And so I did 30 days of video blogs about all sorts of things, like where to hide your insulin pump when you're wearing a dress, or the difference between the types of diabetes, and even just breaking down how to use a glucose meter, how you test your blood sugar. Because I found that some medical professionals aren't as in depth with their patients as need be. So I felt like offering all of that. And then I read a statistic in 2017. And that statistic shared that currently it's 1 in 10 people in the United States have diabetes. This is from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. And that by 2050, it could be as many as 1 in 3. And as someone living with this disease who is insulin dependent, I just knew that I didn't want that to come to pass. And I am not a medical professional. So I asked myself, what can I do? And so I took all of my skills as a storyteller and turned them at this disease because, as you all can tell, there's a lot of misinformation and confusion, and people still think that it's caused by sugar when no form of diabetes is actually caused by sugar. You can check the ADA's website. They'll back me up on that. So I created a stage show, and I want to share just a bit of the trailer of what I created in 2017. So I'll share that to give you a glimpse of how I took my experience living with diabetes and I'm using that to educate folks and advocate for our community. So let me go ahead and find the trailer and share that.
Diabetes kills someone.
I check maybe 5 times a day, and it's never better than a guess, a stab in the dark.
I'm a ghost. I'm a ghost. 100 years ago, I would already be dead.
How do we pull them toward the experience of emptiness that they resist, but is also what they are after?
The doctors tell me I am in danger of going into a coma. What am I like when I'm low? Shame is a word that came up a couple days ago as I was thinking and meditating on this piece and remembering all of the times that I would unplug my pump before going on a job interview, before auditioning, before performing. Diabetes is not contagious, but this play is about making it contagious, making the awareness it brings something that spreads. Diabetes is no longer a death sentence, but it remains a life sentence.
So I don't even think Jay has seen the stage version yet, so I hope to bring that back. But when the pandemic hit, I realized that it was disproportionately affecting our community. And so I felt like I needed to take it online and continue sharing the message. And I think one of the reasons why I was so fortunate to have found Jay when finding nutritionists to work with and speak to audiences after, because as you can tell, I throw a lot at folks. I think it's really important that we talk about this disease as a community. And oftentimes we're alone with our doctors, but this show has given folks an opportunity to be in a room or be on a Zoom with, 100 to 300 other folks and share their experiences. And ask direct questions. That's why I think this is so amazing, and I'm so thrilled to be here. So that, I just think what this is so important. And I want to share that my journey, interestingly enough, I think why Jay was like the perfect nutritionist to partner with, is that I was eating the standard American diet, and I ended up meeting a guy who happened to be vegan. And that man never said you need to be vegan, but started just wanting to put foods that I liked into his fridge so that I could eat them as well. And so within 3 months' time, I found myself having not eaten any meat, dairy, honey, any animal products. It just kind of happened, and I felt better. And now I will say everyone is different. So while I am vegan, everyone, you've got to do the work with your doctors on your diet, which is why I think it's so great that she's talking about whole food, plant-based. So just leaning in that direction really dropped my insulin need quite a bit, because it upped my insulin sensitivity. So I noticed that immediately and actually had to have my doctors take down my basal rates. So it was pretty amazing, and I didn't realize that was going to happen when I started eating plant-based. In addition, like since that happened, since then, Laban and I have actually now adopted an oil-free diet. So we're actually reducing even more of the saturated fat we were getting. And so we are gluten-free and oil-free. And even then, I saw my insulin sensitivity spike right up. So I can attest that that it really does work. So even me as a type 1, and they're just like, eat whatever you want, just take the right amount of insulin. It doesn't work like that. It's painful when the blood sugar is spiking and dropping. I feel it in my body. And so by doing these things, I find that things are a lot more even, and I feel better. Now, I will say, when your blood sugar is elevated, your pain tolerance shifts. And for those who might find that their, blood sugars are constantly elevated, then finding themselves at 100 is actually a really shaky place to be. And I just want to acknowledge that because you've been, like when I was diagnosed, I was at 650 for months. And so coming down off of that, I had to give my body time to recalibrate. And so that shakiness went away. And now I can comfortably be at 80 to 120, which is kind of the range that I'm aiming for. Though I will say it still fluctuates outside of that range. But I'm doing all I can to kind of mitigate the highs and the lows. Now, in making this show, did tons of research because I'm not a scientist, I'm not a doctor, and I didn't want to speak out of turn. So I did tons of research, dumped it all into the project, and also have had lots of medical professionals check my language to make sure that I was sharing proper information, because I knew that at the end of the day, folks learn a lot when they're hit emotionally. There's something about it that just sticks to your bones a little bit more than sometimes when you're trying desperately to take notes during a lecture presentation. So that's where I wanted to use my storytelling skills to address the misinformation and around this disease. So I want to share one more clip with you. This one's a little bit longer, but it shows you a little bit of my personal experience and also some of the history around this disease, which actually dates back to ancient Egypt. But I want to share with you one story in particular, and I think you'll see why. So I'm going to bring up that piece of video, and just know that it's a couple minutes. All right, here we go. Share this.
Every 7 seconds, diabetes kills someone.
I check maybe 5 times a day, and it's never better than a guess, a stab in the dark. And that's why if you can check every 7 seconds, you're basically microdosing, avoiding the high highs and the low lows. You found balance. And so when they give you insulin to deal with this disease, it's not like a flu vaccine. It's not just a couple shots. There has to be a steady stream of a certain amount of insulin. There's about 0.5 units going into me every hour, a little less overnight. It is so small that I would be skyrocketing. And whenever you eat, you have to add more.
The amount of insulin that I am missing is like 25 milliliters a day. Remember when I told you that in 1871, the French pharmacist Apollinaire Bouchardais remarks that his patients with diabetes no longer display elevated levels of sugar in their urine due to extreme food rationing during the Franco-Prussian War? Well, that becomes how this disease is treated until the discovery of insulin. Even so, children with the disease, their average life expectancy is about 1 year. And they are housed in wards about the size of this house and treated with severe fasting and undernutrition. The only treatment being to restrict their diet so severely they eventually starve to death. Imagine 100 cots in rows, filled with children dying from diabetic ketoacidosis. Most are already comatose, and their parents and other relatives are lining the walls, and they are praying, weeping. They're waiting for their children to pass on, because treated or not at this time, diabetes is a death sentence. until Banting, Best, McLeod, and Collip successfully treat that first patient at Toronto General Hospital, and the men immediately manufacture more and then go to one of these wards, and they start in one corner of the room and administer this newly purified extract into the first child, and then they make their way, going from bed to bed to bed to bed to bed, administering insulin to each and every child in this ward. And as they begin injecting insulin into the last comatose child, the first begins to awake, and then another, and another, and another, and another, and another, and another, and another, one by one. All of the children wake up from their comas. This is one of those incredible moments in medical history where a new treatment literally raises people from the dead. Diabetes is no longer a death sentence, but it remains a life sentence.
So that's the point at which I test my blood sugar during the show. I don't share that one, but I share one later. That's usually followed by me also then giving myself insulin. Jay made a point earlier that I want to double down on, which is stress impacts your blood sugar. Because performing this show always seems to elevate my blood sugar, and I'll have runs, dress rehearsals, like private dress rehearsals, and I'll come in at like 102 right at that moment. And then somehow you add an audience and I am at 300 or I am at 250, and it is amazing because right before the show I will have been at a pretty decent number, somewhere in the low hundreds, and stress will just kick it up. And it's really interesting because this is the first show I've ever done where I actually get to take care of my diabetes in real time, because that's not always the case when you're acting on stage. So I just want to share that stress is a big, big influence on your numbers. And you also got to see how a little bit of the pivot we made to do it as an online performance here in my house. So now it's 3 cameras in my house and a live broadcast. So everything you saw, all those video effects are being triggered live by someone in downtown. And I hope that you'll watch the show if you are interested, and also share it with other folks who have a relationship to this disease, because I found it really effective for... We don't always want to talk about our health to all the people that we care about, but they want to know. And so I found speaking up and sharing my own truth resonates with a lot of other folks, and then they can share that with their family members, because at the end of the day, I really want people to know what this program is actually all about. There's something we can do about diabetes, about prediabetes, about type 2 diabetes, even improving my life as a type 1, not to mention all the other forms of diabetes, and a lot of it has to do with our diet. So that's why it's such a joy to be here with you all and share a little bit of my story and some of the history of insulin with you, because this is not an easy disease to live with any form. And I think the divides between don't serve us. I think it's why there was so much shame before, and now I find myself as an advocate also for the disabled community, because I recognize now that that's a community that I'm part of ever since I got diagnosed with type 1. So yeah, I think I will leave it at that, because I just want you to know that there is something we can do to improve our health. So if there are any questions, Jay, if you want to pop on with me. Doctor, hello.
Wow. I have seen the online version a couple of times, and I cannot watch it without all the hairs on my body raising up and without getting misty, because it is so, so powerful, this performance. And I highly recommend that you watch. I'll share the link once we're done with questions and answers. So if you have any questions for any of us, go ahead and put them in the Q&A or the chat. One of the things I was really hoping that Diana would share with us was that piece about the ward, because, you know, a lot of our preconceptions and misconceptions about the way to treat diabetes come from the history. It comes from, you know, well, the only option that we had before insulin was to clamp down on those carbohydrates. And I mean, how heartbreaking was that whole story, but how beautiful too. So medicine definitely has a place. It is absolutely essential that we work with our healthcare professionals, that we work within our healthcare system, but that we also take control, that we have self-empowerment when it comes to our own health. That is a critical piece. And if we're not doing that part, we are selling ourselves way short. It doesn't really even matter what your diagnosis is, any kind of diagnosis, but definitely these sorts of things.
Diana, that was so cool. Thank you so much for sharing with us. I have not seen your presentation yet in full, and so I need to come see it. I can't wait for it. I had a question right off the bat, please. What I'd like to know is, what would you say to someone, I guess a position I'm in a lot, but what would you say to someone that you know that is just newly diagnosed with diabetes? What would you share with them?
I would share with them that sugar doesn't cause this disease, because I think folks are like, oh, I need to cut sugar out of my diet. And really, like, our brains need sugar to function. So that's not going to help. But I would explain then from there that what can cause it is excessive saturated fat in your diet. And a lot of that comes from meat and dairy. So by cutting that back and embracing more plant-based foods, you can make a lot of headway, if not completely go into remission. I actually have a friend who is type 2 who saw the show, was in denial for like 5 years and wasn't doing anything, saw the show, asked me to help her test her blood for the first time with this meter. The doctor just handed her and sent her out the door. And within 3 months, she was pre-diabetic, and now she's fully in remission. And everyone is different, and every case is unique. And type 2 is, you know, can go into remission only till a point, you know, depending on how much damage has happened to your beta cells in your pancreas. So it's really important to stay that. But I share that with folks so that they know that they can do something. I mean, it's one of the strangest diseases because, you know, the only treatment for like type 1 insulin is a liquid that can simultaneously heal you and kill you, and the dosage is in my hands. So it's really interesting, I think, working with doctors on this disease, because so much of we as people living with diabetes, no matter the kind, have a lot more agency than we are led to believe by popular culture, which just says you have diabetes, eventually these things are going to happen to you, which they don't need to happen to you if you take care of yourself. I think you said it really well, Jay, when you were talking about healing. Like, these foods can be really, really healing. And as somebody with type 1, I'm glad to be plant-based because I feel like I am protecting the rest of my body, because there's nothing I can do about not manufacturing insulin, but hopefully I can keep the rest of my systems as healthy as possible for as long as possible. Yeah. Thank you for that question.
That's awesome. Yeah.
That's a fantastic answer. So I just want to point out, somebody's got their hand up. We do need you to type it in because we can't hear you. So either type it in the chat or the Q&A, pretty please. We do have a question. This one's for Dr. Cox. Can statins cause diabetes?
So that's a very good question. So there are the statins, there is a mechanism by which they can make you slightly more insulin resistant. So the way that I describe it to patients is it's not very, very, very slight. So it's not so much that statins cause diabetes, but it can make it, like, how do you describe it? simply. Sometimes what happens is someone will treat, this is what happens, and this is where it came from. I guess this is the best way to go about it. So excuse me. So if we have some underlying unhealthful habits, things are going to rise, right? Weight goes up, sugars go up, blood pressure goes up, cholesterol goes up, right? Things go up. So then we start playing whack-a-mole of, oh, cholesterol's first, oh, blood pressure, oh, and start treating these diseases. Those other things, if we don't treat the underlying cause, they're going to continue to rise. Okay. So a lot of people had high cholesterol and were put on statin medications that address just that one little thing. It doesn't address the underlying habits that are also causing sugars and blood pressure and weight to go up. So if we're not, so they would be put on statins for the cholesterol, and then the sugars would keep creeping up, and oh, the statin caused it. No, that's, so it was the underlying cause. So can we say 100% conclusively that there might not be something about the statin that uncovers a slight amount of sugar abnormality? No. And I don't know if they'll ever be able to say that. We can't get that accurate in the changing human body. So that's where it came from. If it helps, that's probably the clearest.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I mean, it's one system. It's one system. When one thing is going wrong, likely other things are either coming along behind that if you don't address it, or they're already happening at the same time, unfortunately. But fortunately, pretty much everything Dr. Cox mentioned can be, managed or potentially even reversed using good diet and good lifestyle choices. So Mike says, love that you need to keep the rest of your body as healthy as possible. One thing that I love about Diana's performances is that conversation afterward that she talks about. And one of the common themes that she talks about all the time and that come up from audience members is that it must be customized care. Anybody that's worked with me at all knows that I am a broken record when it comes to that. You have to deal with you have to treat and manage and address the individual. Each person's diabetes is unique. Each person's system is unique. Each person's life is unique. And you have to really take that into consideration. So we get questions all the time like, well, doesn't this result in this? Well, the question is oftentimes it depends, right? Depends on the person. But definitely, if you're not addressing those underlying, the underlying causes, or at least, paying attention to what's going on underneath the surface, then other things are going to start piling on. That's pretty much the way that it goes. Any other questions or comments?
I wish we had that hand raised that we saw.
Yeah, it was, let's see, I think I know who it was. So if you raised your hand, go ahead and ask the question by typing it in the Q&A or the chat.
Diana, I want to ask you something else, please. What would you say to someone who, because I imagine you run into this quite a bit, you see people and you interact with people that have diabetes and that have been told by their doctors to perhaps be on a low carb diet and take the medication. Of course, the medication, if it's, but low carb diet. What would you say to that?
Well, I say that that's a road to heart disease and high cholesterol, because oftentimes low carb equates like a lot of animal-based protein, because it doesn't mean that they turn to a lot of the plant-based sources. So I just very calmly try to unpack why they're saying that in particular. I mean, I will say, like, I was joking with Jay the other day about how, like, I was scared to eat bananas after getting diagnosed because I was subject to all of the misinformation that's out there. But it's one of the best things that I could possibly eat, and and as long as there isn't an excessive amount of saturated fat also competing with that banana, my body can actually digest it really well. So I kind of try to break down that and encourage them away from things. I think you were talking about like the keto diet last time, which has short-term gains, but is really a treatment in some cases of cancer, but not one you're supposed to stay on for very long, even in those cases. Yeah, I've gone down some wormholes in terms of that, but I definitely steer folks to knowing that carbohydrates are great for us and they power our brains, so they're not a bad thing.
And can I ask something that patients quite often ask me? They say, well, what do you eat? Right?
That's a good
What are
one.
your favorite meals? Like, what do you, so.
Yeah. Oh, so my partner Laban is the most amazing chef. I mean, he's also been vegan for 30 years. So folks, like he just got blood work. He's super, super healthy. So 30 years deep, we can get all the nutrition that we need on this plant-based diet. He makes amazing black beans. I mean, lentil soups. We have big salads. Throw hemp seeds. I think you had that up on your slide. I make an oil-free, vegan, gluten-free banana bread that sometimes I'll like shave zucchini and carrots into as well. So we eat great. I mean, even for my birthday, he made like plant-based enchiladas and like chili relleno. So it really does, as Jay said earlier, like open up a whole spectrum of things that you can eat. And of course, like I eat tons of fruit now, which I would never have before realizing its relationship to insulin sensitivity and insulin resistance.
That's so awesome. I think it's really powerful for people to hear that someone with type 1 diabetes can eat fruit, right? And not have, so
lots of it.
Yeah, so cool. There is, we have a message, a question. Have you talked to school officials about talking about this subject in schools? And the person asking because her daughter was in elementary school and it was very hard for her to be left out of school goodies at parties.
Yes. I have presented to a couple colleges, but I haven't done this at, elementary or like high school and middle schools. But I mean, it's definitely something that I would love to come and be a speaker at, because I think we need the next generation to have this information, to have the truth about how important our diets are to staying healthy and living very full, robust lives. And I think that, I had to go on a deep dive myself, and I don't think our health classes, I mean, it's kind of like with training as a doctor, they give you a couple hours of nutrition, and most of it's not talking about plant-based. It's starting to, even though this is where I went down a rabbit hole and found like 100 years worth of studies that support plant-based eating as a very healthy way to go.
Right. So one thing, and I just want to put a little plug in. So I'm quite involved in Kids Stream. It's the children's museum that we're working to put in Ventura County in Camarillo. Jay is doing a series of healthy eating for kids. Some small, quick snacks that are very healthful. And so definitely we need to loop you into that too, Diana. But yeah, I agree. As a mom too, it's hard, when all the other kids are eating this crummy, it's not junk food, right? It's not food, it's just junk. So it's that. And like your poor kids are like, and I get like carrot sticks. So like, how do we do it so the carrots, like that's more fun than the other.
I also find it's like, I love bringing stuff with me. So, because people have an assumption that things are just going to be like quinoa and broccoli with no flavoring. That was my uncle, who is now like reversed, all sorts of cholesterol and bad. They wanted to put him on a lot of drugs, and he said, "Give me a month." And then his blood work was such that they said the drugs are working, and he went, "What drugs?" So I find it like a really great opportunity to like share some of the good stuff that we've been able to make or bake or whatever with folks. So I tend to bring stuff with me to get people excited about what food can taste like.
Awesome.
That is an excellent strategy. I use that one myself. When you feed people, they are much more willing to listen, because I always say, if it's not easy, if it's not fun, if it's not delicious, people are not going to do it. I'm not going to do it, right? It's got to be yummy. If it's not yummy, then you're not going to be able to do that long term.
Right.
So I just wanted, people were asking for the link to your presentation. So I just wanted to let everyone know that we popped all the links in of all the free resources we have, including Diana's show. So do check that out. There's another question here. It's an interesting one. It's about water consumption. Did you see that?
Oh, I have not seen it. But I will say it's 1 o'clock right now, so maybe we'll answer it, but pretty quick, since we usually like to stay right on time with getting off at 1 to honor your guys' afternoon.
I can read it out. Michael is asking, I had a question for anyone here. Does drinking a certain amount of water or too much of water have any effect on diabetes? I try to drink a gallon a day.
Can I take that one?
Go for it.
So super quick and short answer, Michael, pretty much it all depends on the food you're eating. Because if someone's eating a bunch of crackers and chips and they're not getting any water in their food, then that's going to be a lot harder to deal with, and we need more water intake. If we're eating a lot of plant-based foods, I mean, beans by themselves, they're about 70% water, fruits, vegetables, 80-90% water. So you're getting a lot of water already. So water intake, I mean, yes, drink when you're thirsty, plus 1 more glass is usually what we go by. If you're going for weight loss, there are some benefits to even more water intake, specifically before meals. But for the most part, usually I'll tell patients, like, don't worry too much about water intake. Make sure you're getting water in your food.
Mm-hmm. Eat your water. Absolutely. Absolutely. There is too much water, though. You can drink too much water. It's hard to do. It's not very common, but it is possible. There's toxicity level to everything, so be careful about that. But it's a good to stay hydrated, especially if you have to release excess weight, or if you're trying to release excess weight. So that's 101. This has been so much fun. I wish we had another hour. I want to thank everyone for coming. I want to thank you, Diana, so much for sharing your story, and for just being here with us today, and for all the amazing work that you do. I love everything that you do. And so, yes, everybody watch the show, share it far and wide, because more people need to know this.
Thank you so much, Diana. And thank you all for joining us. We'll see you next month.
Have a great rest of your day.
Bye.
Bye all.